Well, happy Thursday morning to you, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, look, I gave just a real brief review of the just completed formal public debate between Dr. David Hester of Faulkner University and myself that took place last weekend, July 14th through 16th, here at our Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. I've had a number of people ask that I comment on Dr. David Hester's 23 arguments, if you wish to call them that he presented in his very first affirmative speech. The folks on Dr. Hester's side seem to be bragging that he won the debate based on, pardon me, those 23 arguments. Now, as I said in my very first negative, Dr. Hester's very first affirmative proved that I'm a prophet. Now, not literally, but months and months and months prior to the debate, I told my wife, and I told William Bell, and I told Larry Siegel, and I told some other folks that the only way that Dr. Hester was going to have any chance to establish anything, although it would not in fact objectively and truthfully establish anything, would be to get up and just shotgun argument after argument after argument after argument. Maybe machine gun would be a better term. Not seek to exegetically prove any argument, but just simply say, by means of hypothetical syllogisms mostly, and I'm real sure I know where every one of those arguments came from, by the way, but be that as it may, that is precisely what he did. Now look, you need to know something, all right? An old debater's trick, and that's exactly what it is. It is a debater's trick. But an old debater's trick is you get up there and you throw so many arguments at your opponent that there is no way they can answer them within the confines of the time that is allotted. Did Dr. Hester know that I would not be able to address all 23 arguments? Well, of course he did. And so that meant that he could get up and say, Preston did not address my arguments, therefore he is wrong. Now here's what else you need to know. I presented two basic affirmative presentations. I presented them based upon text, based upon context, based upon exegesis. Go listen to my first affirmative. Now, is there a lot of material in there? Yes, there is. Did I expect David Hester to address every single point of it? Not necessarily, but I did expect him to address it. Those are the rules of the debate. And he didn't touch it, top, side, or bottom. But go back and see my examination of how Paul's prediction of the coming of the Lord for the salvation of Israel, which is the time of the resurrection of the just and the unjust, would be fulfilled and be the fulfillment of Daniel 12. It would be the fulfillment of Isaiah 27, of Isaiah 59. Go back and watch that very carefully and see if David Hester said even one single word about Isaiah 27 and Isaiah 59. And how both of those texts predicted the salvation of Israel at the coming of the Lord at the time of the vindication of the martyrs, which Jesus put in AD 70. Folks, you will see David Hester said literally not one word about those key, fundamental, foundational arguments in my affirmative. Go back and see if he dealt with my second affirmative on the most holy, pardon me, most holy place. You know what you'll find? You will find, as I pointed out in the debate, that David Hester changed his position during the debate. Yeah, that's what happened. Now, about Dr. Hester's 23 arguments. Dr. Hester presented a series of 23 if-then arguments. If this is true, then this is true. This is true, therefore this is true. Modus potens type of argumentation. Now here's the point. When Dr. Hester said, if it is true, and state the very first major premise of that hypothetical syllogism, then it was his responsibility to prove, not to assert, but to prove that first premise is true. He didn't even try. Let me give you an example of that. Dr. Hester says, if it is true that the new heaven and earth was established on the day of Pentecost, then it must be true that the new heaven, new earth that Peter anticipated in 2 Peter 3 was a different new heaven and new earth. Preston believes that the new heaven and new earth began on the day of Pentecost, therefore it must be true that the new heaven and new earth of 2 Peter chapter 3 must be a different new heaven, new earth. You know, folks, this is such fallacious, really, really bad argumentation. David Hester has clearly not read my material, which is really sad. Had he read my material, for instance, in my book, The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat, he would realize, he would understand and know that I believe and teach that the new creation was born, initiated on the day of Pentecost, but was to be fully revealed at the second coming of Christ. Same new creation. And I proved that, pardon me, extensively in that book. Therefore, David Hester's argument is fundamentally and fatally flawed because he fails, number one, to establish that the new creation of Pentecost was the full-blown, full-bloom new creation. He didn't even try. Secondly, he fails to understand my position. Had he stated my position, it would have falsified that entire argument. This is what I mean, ladies and gentlemen, when I say that David Hester made arguments that are fallacious, that are fundamentally, logically, and biblically flawed. Now, look, David Hester even argued, if it is true that the church was established on the day of Pentecost, then it must not be true that the church was established in AD 70. It is true that the church was established on Pentecost, therefore the church was not established in AD 70. Once again, horrible logic. Secondly, it is presuppositional because it claims implicitly that Preston denies that the church was established on Pentecost. That is a false representation of my views. Just like the new heaven and new earth, I affirm, had he read my material, he would know I affirm the church was established on the day of Pentecost in its infancy. By the way, I can document for you where Dr. Hester does not believe the church was full-born, fully grown on Pentecost. It was waiting for the arrival of that which is perfect. It was waiting for the arrival of, quote, the perfect man, which David Hester puts at the completion of the New Covenant revelation in the 90s. You see what I mean? Dr. Hester's arguments, let me say again, are absolutely, fundamentally flawed. They are logically flawed. They completely fail to do exegesis. One of his arguments was, if it is true that the resurrection of the just and the unjust is yet future, then Preston is falsified. It is true that the resurrection of the just and the unjust is in the future, therefore Preston is false. Folks, that argument, if you want to really call that an argument, that argument is absolutely presuppositional. As I pointed out in response, I could argue the following. If it is true that the resurrection of the just and the unjust occurred in AD 70, then David Hester is wrong. The resurrection of the just and the unjust did happen in AD 70, Daniel chapter 12, verses 2 to 7. Therefore, David Hester is wrong. Now you see, I demonstrated exegetically that the resurrection of the just and the unjust was in AD 70 when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. And oh, by the way, David Hester changed his position on Daniel 12 twice during the debate. So I respectfully submit to you that those folks, and I say this as kindly as possible, those of you who support David Hester, it's my sincere, honest prayer and request that you listen very carefully to the arguments. When David Hester says, oh, very clearly the resurrection has not happened, what's his proof? What exegesis did he give? He promised repeatedly to go to 1 Corinthians 15 and exegete the chapter. What did he do? He didn't do it. No exegesis, no exposition, no genuine logical argumentation, simply presuppositional, false, logically flawed argumentation. In the coming weeks and months, I may more carefully analyze each and every one of Dr. Hester's arguments for you. I may do that in written form, okay? But problem is, the bottom line is, David Hester's first affirmative was an old debater's trick to impress the audience, to impress his side, that, boy, look at all that stuff. And yet not one of them engaged in exegesis. Every single one of them is based upon a false misrepresentation of my view or a failure to understand my view, and number 4, logical fallacies. Well, that's all I have to say this morning. As I mentioned, we'll deal more with Dr. Hester's 23 quote arguments at a later time. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, Lord willing. We'll be back Monday, and we're going to continue our Man of Sin series for a period of time. Then I'll see if I can get back to Dr. Hester's arguments. So again, have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.